G'day and welcome to another episode of Cuppa with the Jesuit. I'm Father Robin Koning, the Provincial Assistant for Vocations for the Australian Jesuit Province.
With Father Robin, I'm Julian Butler, a Jesuit in formation or training for priesthood, and we're joined today by Father Bill Uren. Father Bill, welcome.
Welcome.
Bill, you're joining us from Newman College at the University of Melbourne, where you've spent a considerable period of time in a number of roles. Would you tell us about your role at Newman at the moment?
Well, I'm what's called officially the Scholar in Residence. It was a role that was invented really for somebody like Father Peter Steele or Professor Peter Steele. And basically, I'm in semi-retirement after having been rector for one way or other about 20 years at Newman College. So I have the benefit of living in Newman College with the students without any of the responsibilities that I had in previous roles. So it's reading, writing, watching a bit of TV, dining with the students, that sort of thing.
Looking at your CV, I was noting it's more than half of your 58 years, I think, of coming up this year of priestly ministry has been involved as either a chaplain at universities or working in university colleges for one brief period, doing both, I think. Would you like to say a bit about how you found that work working with young people, university students, and the importance of that work in the life of the church?
Well, when I entered the Jesuits, all I wanted to do was to go back to Xavier College, where I'd been educated, teach a few classes and kick a football and play cricket. But unfortunately, I've only had 1 year in secondary education. Most of my life has been spent with tertiary students. And I must say, I don't regret that. I find tertiary students very interesting, very challenging at times. But on the whole, I find it a very worthwhile apostolate. They're, as I say, they can be challenging, but they're at a very important part of their lives, mainly between the ages of 18 and 25. And you can see, even over the period they're with us, they're evolving out of adolescence into adulthood. So it's a really interesting time to be engaged with tertiary students.
Bill, you mentioned that one of the things that you're doing at the moment is just being in the dining room and sharing meals with students. Is there a knack to that, to accompanying, to being there with? How do you approach it?
Yes, I think there is. I think one of the mistakes one can make is by talking at students. I think the key to being with students is to listen to them and make the incidental remark that they're used to being lectured at, and so that's the last thing they want when they come to a meal. So it's listening in on their conversation, making the incidental remark, talking about your own experience at times. But the knack, I think, is listening to them rather than, as it were, addressing them. And I mean, as I say, they're in a transitional time of their lives, and you talk to them about their studies, you talk to them about their families, their background. Many of our students, of course, come from a regional and country background rather than an urban background. So this is often, for many of them, this is the first time that any member of their family has been involved in tertiary education. So they're also fairly vulnerable one way and the other.
I was taken by that phrase, incidental remark. I'm wondering if you have any examples of the sort of incidental remark that might open the way for further conversations, or that students might have found helpful.
On the academic side, we say here at Newman, we're a community of the mind, of the imagination, of the heart, and of the spirit. And each of those, as it were, is a key to, as it were, engaging with the students, particularly the academic things, of course. And I've got a fairly wide academic background. So at the moment, for instance, they're talking about their exams and so on. So then you say, well, when I did exams 60 years ago, it was 100% exam, all in November. First term, freshers work. Second term, nobody works. Third term, everybody works. So there's that sort of comparison, and it some degree alleviates, I think, some of their anxiety, say, around examination time. That's an example, really. But and the fact that I've been in university colleges, 3 states over a length of time, I've got a fair background both in the sciences, in the law, in the arts, and so on. So, you know, it's not very difficult to at least engage, at least at a superficial level, with most of the subjects that they're doing. So it makes for interesting conversations.
Bill, a key part of that academic engagement for you has been in the area of bioethics. Would you share with us how you got into that work and what contribution you've made in that space?
Well, it was really by accident. My academic work, both at my master's thesis and my work at Oxford, was really in the philosophy of law, jurisprudence. And then I was over in Western Australia at the time of the introduction of IVF, and the Archbishop at the time, who rejoiced under the wonderful name of Sir Lancelot Goody, called me in and said, "What do you know about IVF?" Which I thought was a strange question for an archbishop to be asking the rector of his university college. I said, "I knew nothing." He said, "Well, neither does anybody else. We've got to provide a representative on the state government committee." So I spent about 3 years sitting on what was known as the Meadows Committee on the ethics of IVF and who should be admitted to it and whether there should be state support and so on. So that's how initially, at least, I got into bioethics. And then when I came back to Melbourne to be rector of Newman in 1987, the professor of philosophy, Tony Cody, who I knew quite well, was interested in taking philosophy into a more applied direction. So he said, how would you feel about teaching a subject in medical ethics or bioethics? And I said, yes. So I set up this course called Issues in Biomedical Ethics, which ran from really embryo experimentation at one end to euthanasia and suicide at the other, you know, via things like abortion, informed consent, all those sort of bioethical issues. And as a result of that, every human research ethics committee has to have on it either an Aboriginal elder or a minister of religion. And so when they looked at me, they thought, here's a minister of religion who's supposed to know something about bioethics. So that's how I got to serve on a variety of bioethics committees, human research ethics committees or clinical ethics committees at universities or hospitals, research centres and so on. So that's, it became, and bioethics, of course, particularly through the 80s and 90s, became a sort of an expanding industry of one sort or another. So there was plenty of work to do. I think I served one way or other on over 20 human research and clinical ethics research committees of all sorts. I even served on an ethics committee in Brisbane for the Masonic homes. I think my father would have turned in his grave to find his son service, helping the Masons.
Bill, when you were asked by Sir Lancelot to be involved in that first group, and as time has gone on with that requirement for ministers of religion to be on bioethics committees, the culture over time has obviously changed. We're in a more secular kind of cultural context. Is there still something that a person with a religious background or faith brings that's particular and useful, do you think, to those conversations?
I think it does. I think it invites the members of the committee, and usually there are about 10 or 12 members on each of these human research ethics committees. It invites them to look at the principles out of which they're operating. But very often, I think a lot of them operate basically out of almost assumed utilitarian points of view, you know, whatever helps the greatest number, the greatest happiness, the greatest number, rather than considering the long-term implications of some of these bioethical procedures. So that's what I think a religious member can bring. And very often I found in the end, in a sense, you'd be outvoted often outvoted, say, 9-3 or 8-4 and so on. But I think it at least meant that there was an awareness of the social implications as well as as were individual benefit of many of these questionable ethical procedures. Sorry.
Thanks, Bill. You spoke earlier of being at Xavier and that highly idealistic sense of call to go and teach at Xavier and kick the footy around. Do you want to say a bit more about your being attracted to a Jesuit vocation during your school years there and what was involved in that?
Well, I came again to Xavier only in year 9, so I spent about 4 or 5 years there. I really admired the priests who taught me. They were wonderful men. Father Paul Keenan, Father Jerry Owens, Father Dan Fitzpatrick, Father Mick O'Mahony, Roland Boylan. And I guess I'd been thinking about a priesthood vocation because my local parish priest, Father Pat Luffman, was a wonderful diocesan priest. But when I went to the Jesuits, I guess that vocation towards priesthood was specified in the Jesuit direction. And as I said, all I wanted to do was, when I finally got ordained, was to go back to Xavier and teach a few classes and kick a football and play cricket, because I was very, like many boys of my generation, very interested in sport. Yeah. So it was happenstance, really, that I got into tertiary colleges rather than into secondary. Yeah.
And so, Bill, that isn't obviously what played out as you've indicated. What is it that sustained you in the vocation? What's held you in with an ability to be in those spaces, university colleges and ethics committees, and be a Jesuit in those spaces?
Well, first of all, Jesus, basically. That's my real commitment. I meditate, as Jesuits do, every day on the New Testament. And I just think Jesus, coming from that Old Testament background, and this new take he took on it all. And we've just been in the readings recently, it's been the Sermon on the Mount. And just the wonderful sort of orientation that Jesus presents there about God makes his rain to fall and his sun to shine on the just and the unjust alike. So who are we to sort of start discriminating? So that's the thing that's really sustained me through my vocation, is this commitment to Jesus and to his mother, Mary. I think Pope Francis, a wonderful, wonderful man, a great hero, and the Jesuit, my Jesuit companions. Those are the sorts of things that certainly sustained me in my Jesuit vocation. And the work that I do with students, as I say, it's interesting, it's challenging, sometimes it's mentoring, sometimes it's just listening. So I've had a wonderful life.
So, Bill, if one of the students there, and maybe this happens from time to time, spoke to you about an interest in the priesthood or in the Society of Jesus, what sort of incidental remarks might you make to them in that conversation?
Well, I think I'd say to them first that, because the students that I deal with are studying, mainly doing undergraduate and sometimes postgraduate studies, I tell them to finish that first. But in the meantime, I'd ask them, are you attracted to a diocesan vocation or to a religious order? So, and the religious orders have wonderful vocation websites these days, and I tell them to look closely at them. And, if it's one specifically that they're interested in, then to contact the vocations director, and hopefully, I'm sure he would enable them to see a priest of that particular religious congregation or a diocesan vocations director, to speak with him on a regular basis about what becoming a priest or a brother involves. And it's a decision, I think, that it grows upon you. We're not like St. Paul struck down on the road to Damascus, most of us. It's a gradual call, and to recognise that the period of novitiate in particular is a period of trial and testing, and indeed all the studies leading up to ordination are times of probation to an extent. So the complete commitment doesn't have to be made, as it were, immediately. That people shouldn't feel that they're, as it were, jumping in. They're gradually, as it were, advancing upon the sea.
Thank you very much, Bill, for your time and for sharing what's given you life in your various aspects of your vocation and your own journey in that. Thank you very much.
Good. My pleasure. Thank you.